In the archives of the Second World War, buried between pages of conflicting reports and censored communications, there exists a case where a single captured submarine, silent, crewless, and misunderstood, pushed two naval powers to the edge of a battle neither intended to fight. It began as a routine intercept in the North Atlantic, a region where cold seas and colder intentions shaped the daily rhythm of survival. No one involved could have imagined that within a matter of hours, the vessel they seized would transmit a signal powerful enough to mobilize entire fleets. And no one knew that the transmission wasn't deliberate. It was an echo, an accidental trigger inside a captured machine that still remembered who it belonged to. At first light, the boarding party approached the submarine they believed was abandoned. The U-boat drifted strangely upright, engines stalled, hatches unlatched as if its crew had vanished mid-operation. These scenes were not uncommon in World War II, but something about this vessel felt wrong to the officers stepping onto its cold metal deck. They found no bodies, no blood, no evidence of evacuation. What they found instead were operational charts, cipher pads, and equipment left in active configuration, suggesting a quick departure or something far more troubling. A crew forced to flee in disarray. Inspectors moved cautiously through the narrow corridors, documenting every detail for intelligence use. The air still smelled of oil and steel. Gauges were frozen mid-read. A half-written message glowed faintly on the sub's radio interface. Each artifact was photographed, tagged, and secured. For the intelligence teams working behind the front lines of World War II, captured vessels were floating treasure chests, sources of encryption protocols, operational routines, and rare glimpses into enemy psychology. But among the scattered items was something far more dangerous. A partially decoded message referencing fleet movements that neither side had acknowledged in open channels. It was during the transfer of the submarine, hitched to a towing vessel and pulled toward a secure port, that the incident unfolded. The towing team followed standard procedure: disable the radio, remove batteries if possible, and isolate power systems. But U-boat engineering, designed for wartime resilience, didn't always yield to quick instructions. Somewhere below the deck, as the craft rocked in the swells, a backup power cell re-engaged. A flicker of light pulsed through damaged wiring. Then, without human hands touching a dial, the submarine broadcast a short-range burst across a frequency the enemy monitored obsessively. The signal was incomplete, distorted, and accidental, but it matched an emergency pattern used by the submarine's original Navy, one that indicated imminent danger and requested rapid support. On the receiving end, far across the gray horizon, enemy radio officers reacted instantly. For trained ears, even fragmented messages carried the weight of potential disaster. Command headquarters reviewed the intercepted signal, cross-referenced it with known patterns, and interpreted it not as a captured vessel signaling by mistake, but as a call from a friendly unit under duress. Within minutes, destroyers altered course, battleships warmed engines, aircraft squadrons prepared for takeoff. In the chaos of World War II communications, where deception and counter-deception shaped every decision, no one questioned the legitimacy of the signal. The fear was simple. If a submarine had issued a distress call, the threat was real, and action was mandatory. Commanders drafted emergency mobilization orders, believing their fleet was responding to an ambush or failed operation. Meanwhile, Allied naval strategists monitoring the region noticed sudden, unexplained enemy movements. Reconnaissance aircraft reported ships repositioning and aircraft scattering into defensive patterns. At first, it appeared to be a coordinated response to an attack that never happened. Confusion spread through war rooms. Analysts cross-checked intercepted communications, searched for coded warnings, and re-examined logs. Everything pointed to a rapidly escalating situation triggered by a signal whose origin no one could yet identify. As the captured submarine continued its journey toward port, the towing crew remained unaware of the chaos unfolding miles away. Radio operators on nearby ships picked up faint echoes of the same accidental burst but dismissed them as background interference. Unknown to them, the submarine's damaged transmitter had latched onto a broadcast loop, sending intermittent signals that varied in clarity. Each pulse reinforced the enemy's misinterpretation. A vessel was under attack, and reinforcements had to reach it before it was too late. Enemy strategists convened emergency briefings. Maps were redrawn, contingencies updated, and deployment orders issued with urgency. World War II command structures rarely paused to question the authenticity of distress patterns during active operations. The potential cost of hesitation was too high. So fleets moved, fast and coordinated, toward an objective none of them fully understood. Attempts to halt the escalation began only when reconnaissance units reported inconsistencies. Ships dispatched to locate the source of the distress call found empty ocean. No damaged vessel, no battle signs, only the quiet expanse of sea reflecting the growing confusion. Naval analysts struggled to reconcile the signal with the absence of physical evidence. Some suspected Allied interference, others whispered about misdirection or sabotage, but as more intelligence filtered in, an uncomfortable realization spread through the command structure. Something was wrong with the signal itself. By the time Allied forces secured the captured submarine inside a guarded port, the accidental broadcast had already reshaped the naval chessboard. Fleets had shifted hundreds of miles. Supply convoys were rerouted to avoid potential ambush zones. Air patrols were stretched thin, and in the midst of the adjustments, mistakes were made. Communication lines crossed, orders misinterpreted, risks compounded. When engineers finally accessed the submarine's radio room, they discovered burnt wiring, fused components, and a half-melted transmitter plate. The device was completely non-functional by the time they opened it. But its earlier pulse, recorded by Allied intercept stations, matched the enemy's distress pattern almost perfectly. The conclusion was inescapable. The sub had broadcast a distress signal without human involvement. Now the challenge was containing the consequences. Naval intelligence teams drafted correction cables, attempting to clarify the situation through monitored channels, without revealing that they had captured the submarine. Such disclosure would have compromised critical code-breaking efforts. Instead, they crafted vague explanations, redirecting enemy attention while subtly encouraging de-escalation. The sea slowly fell quiet again. Fleets returned to prior positions. Aircraft stood down. But the incident left a permanent stain on operational reports, an almost catastrophic counterattack sparked not by espionage, sabotage, or strategy, but by an unintended signal from a vessel already under Allied control. As the final declassified files show, the event became a case study in World War II communication vulnerabilities. It demonstrated how, in a conflict defined by encryption and secrecy, even a single mechanical malfunction could distort reality, influence strategy, and risk thousands of lives. The captured submarine never fired a shot, yet for a brief moment it became one of the most dangerous vessels in the Atlantic, capable of triggering a confrontation neither side wanted. In the days that followed, the true scale of the incident began to take shape inside sealed rooms where only the most trusted intelligence officers were allowed. Analysts reconstructed the event minute by minute, tracing every fragment of intercepted communication, every shift in fleet pattern, and every command issued by both sides. What they discovered was unsettling. The accidental signal from the captured submarine had not only caused enemy forces to mobilize, it had nearly triggered a full-scale naval confrontation. The reconstructed timeline revealed that within 15 minutes of the transmission, enemy high command had authorized a defensive sweep by destroyers. Within 30 minutes, strategic bombers had been loaded with depth charges. Within an hour, battle groups had pivoted toward what they believed was a compromised operational zone. The war had entered one of its most sensitive phases, where both sides were calibrating new codebooks, new convoy routes, and new assumptions about one another's capabilities. An unexpected signal, especially one carrying a distress identifier, was a spark in a fuel-rich environment. Meanwhile, inside the secure port where the captured submarine now rested, engineering teams performed an exhaustive inspection. They traced the wiring faults to a combination of storm damage, operator error, and an internal power surge caused by the towing strain. The ship's electrical grid, shaken repeatedly by waves and sudden directional shifts, had reconnected a secondary power loop buried deep within the frame. Most of the cables were scorched when engineers found them, but enough remained intact to piece together the sequence of events. The most important discovery came from a heat-scored solder joint inside the transmitter assembly. The waveform imprint on the material showed that the outgoing signal matched a pre-configured emergency packet, one designed to activate automatically if a submarine lost stability or exceeded certain pressure thresholds. Normally, this system would be disabled during surface towing. Normally. But World War II vessels, especially those designed under constant pressure of rapid deployment, were engineered with overlapping systems, redundancies, and fail-safes that did not always behave predictably when damaged. The captured submarine had functioned exactly as it was built to. It had called for help when its systems detected catastrophic failure conditions, even though no crew remained to interpret or override that call. Naval intelligence now faced a dilemma. The enemy had responded to what they believed was a legitimate distress call. Their fleets had been repositioned, their supply chains disrupted, and their patrol schedules thrown off rhythm. If the Allies exploited this shift, it would provide massive strategic gain, but at the cost of further escalation and the risk of revealing sensitive code-breaking successes. So commanders chose a different path. They would quietly allow the incident to settle while using diplomatic channels and monitored broadcasts to encourage a gradual reset of the naval posture. Enemy forces, however, were slower to stand down. Their internal documents captured years later show confusion bordering on paranoia. Some believed the distress signal was a trap engineered by Allied intelligence. Others suspected it was authentic but feared the submarine had been lost due to a new Allied weapon or technique. Still others believed the submarine had attempted to defect, and the garbled transmission reflected a final moment of betrayal. The distortions were fueled by the fog of war that defined the Second World War, where incomplete information was the rule, not the exception. Inside their war rooms, strategists debated whether to pursue the unknown threat further. They issued secondary reconnaissance flights, dispatched additional submarine hunters, and continued monitoring the suspicious frequency for days. But nothing else appeared. The ocean gave them silence, and silence during World War II was often interpreted as deception rather than truth. The absence of further signals only deepened their unease. On the Allied side, similar uncertainties circulated. Commanders questioned whether the enemy's aggressive movements were a precursor to an attack or merely a reaction to internal miscommunication. Intelligence officers worked long hours drafting correction cables, messages disguised as routine traffic that subtly guided enemy analysts toward interpretations that wouldn't escalate the situation. It was a delicate balance, reveal too much, and they risked exposing captured intelligence, reveal too little, and the enemy might prepare for an assault that was never coming. Ships across the Atlantic spent days on high alert, convoys rerouted into safer waters, delaying critical supplies. Patrol aircraft flew extended hours in freezing wind patterns. Naval radios remained open to emergency frequencies, listening for echoes of the accidental signal. Even when the fleets finally began returning to their original positions, the tension remained. The ocean had become a theater of mistrust, shaped not by gunfire but by misunderstanding. In the weeks that followed, communication officers compiled a declassified-style post-incident analysis, later buried in sealed archives. They detailed how a single malfunctioning transmitter on a captured vessel had created a chain reaction through 3 separate command structures. One false signal had triggered almost 50 individual orders across enemy fleets. Another 20 had been drafted on the Allied side to counteract or interpret those movements. Hundreds of men had been placed in positions of imminent danger, pilots ordered into the sky, sailors into battle formation, maintenance crews rushing to arm warships, all because of a technological quirk inside a drifting submarine. The report's final pages held a quiet but sobering conclusion. In modern warfare, even in the 1940s, information itself had become a weapon. A signal did not need intent to be dangerous. It only needed to be heard. The captured submarine, stripped of sensitive equipment and rendered inert, was eventually towed into a salvage bay. Engineers removed remaining components for study. Intelligence teams archived every document found aboard, and naval historians years later examined the vessel as a case study in communication risk. The transmitter that had caused the alarm was melted into fragments and filed as evidence. Even in broken form, it was treated with caution. Long after the war, once classified papers were opened to the public, the event became an example of the chaos that defined naval operations in World War II. Without satellites, without digital encryption, without stable communication networks, commanders relied heavily on radio bursts, coded sheets, and interpretations made under pressure. In an environment where seconds mattered and uncertainty was constant, even an accidental signal held the power to reshape decisions at the highest levels. For veterans who had served during those tense days, the memory remained vivid. Some recounted aircraft warming on runways, waiting for the order to strike. Others remembered destroyer captains pacing their bridges, unsure whether the enemy movement signaled attack or retreat. For many, it was one more reminder that the ocean during the Second World War was not only a battlefield of steel and fire, but a battlefield of information, a place where the invisible could be more terrifying than the visible. And in the center of that battlefield drifted a lone submarine, captured but not silent, broken but still active enough to send a single message that neither side understood in time. It remained a symbol of the war's unpredictable nature. A vessel that fought no battle, sank no ship, and yet almost triggered a confrontation that could have rewritten the history of the Atlantic theater. The legacy of this incident lives on in modern naval doctrine, where communication safeguards, signal authentication protocols, and multi-layered verification systems are now mandatory. These lessons were not learned through calm analysis, but through moments like the captured submarine crisis. Moments where the boundary between accident and catastrophe was razor thin. In the end, the quiet sea that returned after the tension felt almost unreal. Fleets eased back into standard formations, convoy routes normalized, and the radio waves once again carried the routine hum of operational traffic. But the men who had witnessed those hours of confusion knew how close the war had come to igniting an unintended battle. The declassified communication failure report that closed the file did not offer dramatic language or sweeping conclusions. It simply stated a fact that remains as relevant today as it was in 1942. In war, clarity is fragile. A single signal, true or false, can change everything. And for a brief, dangerous moment during World War II, a captured submarine drifting beneath a gray Atlantic sky proved exactly that.